G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and I was working on a video in the background, which is, well actually I've got two videos in the works at the moment, proper videos. One is the Siege of Cthonia book review, hoping to have that one out this weekend, and the other is a look back at the old Chaos Codexes in 40K, and I've mentioned a couple of times and shown a picture of these particular books and what I'm looking at, but it is very much tied into those that we get this article, which dropped in a very timely fashion for me. So I thought I'll just create a quick video and insert it in between. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is, look, I don't care that a lot of this stuff has gone, from being able to be used in 40K to not being able to be used in 40K. Because this is a trend that is very old with Games Workshop, okay? So the things I was complaining about 7 years ago on this channel, this is one of those very things, and it comes in ebbs and flows. And because of that, I wasn't really keen to chase it up as an issue. And now, of course, we've reached the point where people are saying, well, hang on a minute, this isn't right, this isn't fair, and I'm sitting here going, well, I've been telling you this for 7 years and you called me salty. So, I'm not going to get upset over it. No, what I want to talk about is the fact that many of these factions suffer from this problem because their factions are not supported in a healthy manner by the company. That is actually the issue at play here, not the issue of losing units in general, because there are factions, principally Space Marines, who benefit so much from what they already have that losing one or two Forge World items or heresy-related items isn't going to affect them in the least. Whereas a faction like Chaos Space Marines, who, what, 25 to 30, somewhere in that region, that's how many units they're going to lose. That's a big deal for that faction because, well, these problems go back to that 3rd edition book, and really to 3.5, because 3.5 was the last great era of 40k codexes. And what do I mean by this? Well, the great era was started by 3.5, and we call it 3.5 because it dropped before the 4th edition rulebook did, but it was a 4th edition codex and had all these new rules in it, which at the time were the universal special rules, and this was their introduction. And it was considered a very overpowered codex, which it was in the context of 3rd edition codexes. But the minute the 4th edition codexes started coming out and you saw what they had, it was actually very par for the course. So it was a real shame when that was retired. The way the codexes worked back then was they were very modular. They gave you all the tools to create any version of the faction that you were playing that you wanted to. You wanted to create a Space Marines force, for example, it gave you rules for creating custom chapters. You had to pick a big positive, a big negative to go with it, smaller positives and smaller negatives, and there was tables you could pick from, and you could tailor it to suit whatever chapter you wanted. Tyranids, their best ever codex, was also a 4th edition codex. It was a evolution-based codex. So pretty much every unit had access to a ton of different upgrades that you could pick from. And that's where a lot of the Tyranid monstrous creatures that you know and love today, like the Carnifex, the Hive Tyrant, they all came from that time period where the evolutions had to be modelled and therefore they provided them in the kit. The Carnifex and the Hive Tyrant from the edition prior, they were metal, white metal, and they were not customizable at all. So going to the multi-part plastic kits for those particular units in the game was a huge deal, and of course you got things like Scything Talons, Venom Cannons, Crushing Claws, like whatever combination of them you want to use, it was given to you. Fantastic compared to the previous editions. Imperial Guard. Imperial Guard, you got to pick, similar to the Marines, you got to pick different doctrines. So for example, you could take Kazakin as troops and gain deep strike on them to play a Harakoni Warhawks force, as an example. And these were the ways that, but there was negatives in there, like if you lost all your Kazakin, then the other guy got lots of victory points for it. So there were trade-offs, right? 4th edition was an amazing era. And 4th edition for Chaos, so 3.5 book, had a combination of the gods and the regular legions and just regular pirates like the Red Corsairs all rolled into one, and it did it very well, which is why that codex is so beloved to this day. And bear with me because there is a point to this story. Now, that beloved codex also had demons in it, because back in those days, demons were not their own thing. And I believe to this day, they shouldn't be their own thing. They were far more interesting when they were played as a part of a Chaos Space Marine force. Because when you remove demons from Chaos Space Marines, they become Space Marines, because that is essentially the equipment they have. And back in those days, you would ask things like, why don't Space Marines have a Vindicator? Why don't they have a Whirlwind? And eventually they got a Vindicator, but they didn't. The only two vehicles they had, if you go back to 3rd edition, was the Land Raider and the Rhino. And the Predator. So 3 vehicles. And if you wanted, you could also include the Dreadnought. 3.5 gave us Basilisk for Iron Warriors, it gave us Vindicators, and it gave us the first Demon Engine. It gave us the Defiler. And this was 20 years ago, so it shows the vintage on some of these kits. Now, in any case, demons, the way they worked back then was you had to summon them onto the table. So your regular Chaos list consisted of your normal Chaos Space Marines, right, whether they were dedicated to a god, whether they were undivided, whatever it might be. And you could upgrade them to have an idol or a banner in the squad, and this banner basically acted as a summoning point for these demons. And you could bring your demons in basically from reserves based off their these banners into the gameplay. So you summoned units onto the battlefield rather than deep strike or any of that kind of thing, and there was a chance that you could fail this. And when it came to things like greater demons, you summon them onto the battlefield by sacrificing a character, and that could be any character in the army, which gave you some really interesting tactical versatility. Sometimes you just sacrifice a squad sergeant, but other times maybe you've got a Praetor, well, it wouldn't be a Praetor, it would be your Chaos Lord back in those days, and your Chaos Lord, once he got wounded or something, maybe he was the perfect choice to bring the demon through. Like, it really depended how you constructed your list and what the goals were with your characters. And there were bonuses you could put to this, like demonic chains, to boost your chances of getting the roll off, at the consequence of, well, that's points that aren't going to be used for buying war gear. And there was a lot of fun things you could do. And Demon Princes in those days, the way they worked was you started with a regular Chaos Lord, and you could buy them demonic upgrades, okay? And these upgrades were things like demonic armor, which gave them equivalent of artificer armor. You could give them demonic invulnerable saves, demonic weapons, and the more of these you added to them, represented them getting a greater level of corruption. And once you tipped over a certain number of points spent on this upgraded war gear, you were considered to be a Demon Prince. So you lost your regular rules and you gained the Demon Prince stat line and rules. Well, you basically reached the Demon Prince stat line by boosting the Chaos Lord stat line so much. And it was a really fun and inventive way to do it. And it also did all this as well as giving you the Death Guard rules, Thousand Suns rules, and World Eaters rules. And I would argue it did it better and more simply than today's books do. Now, I'm going to cover a lot of this in that particular video, unfortunately, so for some of you, that might be a bit boring when we do it, but you'll get to see it demonstrated. But for the sake of this video, you have this really cool mechanic of demons, and then demons just get ripped out of there, okay? So you didn't gain many extra vehicles, right? You've lost the Basilisk from Chaos, you've got your Demon Engine, but then you go into the next edition, or to the 5th edition era, and Chaos is basically down to a Land Raider, a Predator, and a Rhino, and a Vindicator. Those are your vehicle choices. And the demons are their own thing, and unfortunately, the Marines keep getting more and more new gear. So instead of Chaos having demons to make up for the lack of equipment that they had compared to Marines, who had things like, they had the Whirlwind, all these different Dreadnought variants, Land Speeders, different types of Terminators, Terminator war gear, all of that stuff that Marines had over Chaos in that time period. Nothing was given to Chaos to make up the gap, to fill the void left by ripping the demons out. Instead, they just arbitrarily decided demons were better out than in of the Codex. And for the demons, they of course missed out on, well, they lost the shooting. They very much became a close combat or melee-oriented army, and that created a lot of problems, especially in late 5th edition, when, I had a game I played against Dark Eldar, Drukhari they're now called for copyright reasons, crock of shit, but anyway. I played against the Drukhari, and I had a Nurgle demon army. The whole army had Silent Purposeful. The way that worked was you rolled 2d6, and the highest d6 you rolled was the distance you moved that turn. So you usually moved about 4 inches. How does a 4-inch moving demon ever catch a vehicle which is able to move over 20 inches a turn? Well, spoilers, you couldn't. And so it was literally unwinnable, some of these games, to play against them, because if you played a mono-god demon's army, you just don't have the tools. And so both armies were weaker without those individual parts there. They were better as a homogeneous entity. And then going into 6th edition, demons just got completely and utterly ripped entirely from the Chaos book, so there weren't even lesser demons anymore. It was fully separated, split down the middle. Demons got a very strong Screamer style list in 6th edition, which was like a re-rollable 2+ armor save, basically, or invulnerable save, sorry, on a particular demon force, which made them very, very, very strong, and they dominated the meta for about 5 minutes. But Marines kept all their stuff, and everything that Chaos had that Marines didn't, like Chaos had Obliterators and they had Mutilators, well, Marines got an equivalent version of it. And at the dawn of 6th edition, Flyers became a regular part of the 40K game. They weren't skimmers, they were Flyers, and they had a ton of really good rules. And, well, here's where this comes in. This is the Hellblade. It was a Forge World model, and, well, Chaos didn't have anti-air because they wrote these first couple of 6th edition books, like Chaos and Dark Angels, who were the first 2 codexes of that edition. And then they wrote the Sisters of Battle shortly after them as a White Dwarf PDF army. And you had no way of fighting aircraft. Meanwhile, a faction like the Necrons, players were just spamming these things, night sides. They were everywhere. And Forge World had this reputation at the time, unfairly, I want to add, based off a couple of strong units. People judged Forge World as just being overpowered because of certain Imperial Army armor combinations that people had brought along to 40k. So you paid a not insignificant amount of money to get this Hellblade. I bought 2 of them, right? And they came over from the United States, from the United Kingdom to Australia, and I put them together. And they were, I think, 105 points, and they were armor 10 all around, armed with 2 Reaper autocannons, and they had the crappy demonic crew sort of rule, so they were like ballistic skill 3, which means they hit things on like 4 pluses. And they had 4 shots and only 36 inches range, but you were fighters and you were fast. And then you compare it to the same amount of points got you the Night Scythe, which had almost identical stats. That's why this is such a great comparison. The Night Scythe was a transport, not a fast attack option, so it didn't use up those slots. And it also had transport capacity, and if it crashed, unlike other flyers, it didn't kill the people inside, it just gently put them onto the tabletop. They just get teleported into the game. The weapons on this vehicle were basically the same stats as the Chaos vehicle's weapons. The problem was that when they rolled a 6 to hit on their twin-linked weapons, they got 3 extra hits. So that was the way that the Tesla weapons and such worked. And it made the Night Scythe incredibly strong as a flyer. And the only way to plug the gap and be able to fight these things at the time was to take the Hellblade from the tail end of 5th edition into 6th. There was then the Hell Drake that got released, which was Chaos's flyer, and we all know what we think about that. So this little story brings us to today, and to these units that are being just, well, thrown to the side, because Chaos, more than many, is going to be hurt by this. Because factions like Chaos relied on these extra vehicles to give them the tools that they lacked in order to compete with other factions. And again, this represents different, well, hurts different factions in different ways. And it's a problem that has been occurring for a very, very long time. So it doesn't surprise me that they've gone down this route again. Now, you can argue all you like that, okay, Games Workshop collected their money, yada yada. And there are the people who say, well, it will balance the game better. How can it balance the game better when you're removing 20 odd units from Chaos, nearly 30 units from Chaos, and Marines are still going to have dozens more units in their basic core lineup? All you've done is just gimp one faction preferentially over another without addressing the core problems in balance that are contained within the game system. And again, this is something that goes back to the removal of things like demons. And there are other factions that were hurt by this as well. The changes to things like Harlequins, for example, the way Harlequins were tied into the craft worlds and they're not, and then they became their own thing, and yeah, all the trials and tribulations that come with that. Obviously, for the Orcs, a lot of their best big, super heavy tanks and such was all Forge World, and it's all basically aren't available to you these days. It's a real issue. The Craft World Eldar are another great example. The Wraith Knight and overpowered Eldar shenanigans aside from that sort of thing, they had these fantastic super heavies like the Cobra over at Forge World that never made their way into plastic on the tabletop. And of course, with the just constant new releases for the Space Marines, one faction's clear favoritism from the company and from the designers has just increased the gap over time. Because, like I said, Marines have how many flavors of land speeder or grav vehicles? And Marines have how many flavors of tanks in their force, right? Or let's think of some. So, Marines have, what, 3 different types of land raider. They've got Razorbacks, they've got Whirlwinds, Stalkers, Hunters, the Gladiators, Enforcers, whatever, the Primaris ATV. They've got, what, how many different types of land speeders? I don't know. But let's say like 15 plus different vehicles, right? That are available to them and not, that are still usable in their current codex for 10th edition 40k. And you go to a faction like Chaos, and it's like, well, you've got the Land Raider, Godhammer pattern, so las cannons only. You've got the Predator, you've got the Vindicator, and you have the Rhino. And that is it. Your demon engines are basically stripped away from you at this point, so how are you supposed to compete one for one, vehicle for vehicle? Well, in the old days, not a concern. In the old days, it was like, cool, I'm bringing greater demons. So good luck to you fighting against, defilers, demon vehicles, or greater demons themselves. Like, this gives me a tremendous edge over the loyalists that the loyalists just simply don't have. You're not going to throw a 3rd edition Space Marine Chapter Master into combat with the Keeper of Secrets, because that Chapter Master will last all of 2 seconds. And that made up for the fact that the Space Marines had all this extra stuff that you didn't. But now that's gone. And this has occurred to many factions, where Marines keep getting new item, new item, new item. And people wonder why Space Marines get so well looked after by the company. Well, it's because they sell well. But why do they sell well? I think a huge part of it, and I've said this many times on the channel, is because they get so well looked after. If you're given the choice between Chaos Space Marines, the Space Marines, you look on the shelf and you see, well, I've got 20 different tanks to pick from, how cool for Space Marines, or I've got 3 to pick from Chaos, what do you think is going to be more appealing to the player? And the worst part is, the most frustrating part of all of this, is that the most flavorful stuff is genuinely the Forge World stuff. Things like the Greater Brass Scorpion, for example, or the Decimator engine, are more interesting models than the Hellbrute, which is just a Space Marine Dreadnought, which has some fleshy bits, right? So there was more interesting stuff over at Forge World that added more character to the army, that really helped to sell the fact these aren't just Space Marines. This vehicle is not a version of a Space Marine vehicle with spikes. This is a completely different entity. The Greater Brass Scorpion looks like nothing else. Fantastic, right? Helps build that faction, helps build the illusion of this faction is different to this other faction. And that is great for world building purposes and for establishing an identity on the tabletop. But all of that is just sadly now lost. And yeah, welcome to my world where I've been talking about this issue going all the way back to very first videos I actually put up on this channel talking about how much the Chaos Space Marine Codex sucked and what I said at that time. And for years, people keep coming saying, oh, this channel is salty and never positive, but I'm right. This is what I don't comprehend, is I've said this stuff is going to become a problem, or it was a problem, and now people are agreeing, but it's too late because you've let the problem get worse, because you've just basically let the company get away with it for so long that it becomes this really embarrassing situation. And then, of course, things like the knight here that's on screen, this stuff now becomes plastic, and they say to you, well, you can now take this in your 40k armies. And it's like, well, how long is that going to last? Well, for the knights, probably forever, to be honest. But for the Space Marine vehicles, Leviathan Dreadnoughts and such, I think it's a pretty bitter pill for the people who are playing the game to swallow. So it really sucks. And the way that they say, look, these are Horus Heresy models and we want to keep them distinct from 40k, that's fine, that would be understandable. But then a lot of the things that aren't Horus Heresy, like the Greater Brass Scorpion, were taken away. So, they were specifically purpose built for 40k and they're being lost, which is, it's the great irony of the situation. But yes. Anyway, that's some thoughts I have on this whole fiasco, and just a bit of a history lesson while we were at it about the codexes. You'll see more of this in depth when I release that Chaos Codex book talk. It's a longish discussion, actually, where I basically sit down with the codex and point out the things I love and hate in them. By the way, love the artwork in them. And the Siege of Catonia review, like I said, I'm going to aim to get it out this weekend, hopefully by Sunday night, fingers crossed. But Siege of Catonia, the short review is I don't like it very much at all. I think it's a very poor entry in relation to previous entries. That's the bar I'm choosing to judge it by, but obviously opinions may differ. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm back with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching this episode, and please, I want to hear your thoughts below, especially about the Chaos situation, the removal of demons from Chaos and the fact that they are separate forces, and in the case of the gods have been somewhat rolled back together again. No. 3.5. All they had to do was just take 3.5 and write it with the new rules. But it's just me. Alright. See you all next time.